Dawn broke like a whisper over the wide prairie, pale light stretching across the hills, as if the sky itself hesitated to wake. Bo Laramie leaned against the fence post, a man carved from dust and silence, the kind of figure the wind did not dare disturb. His ranch was quiet but for the distant creak of a windmill and the soft groan of old wood. Settling into another day of lonesome living, he had been awake long before the sun, sipping bitter coffee from a tin mug, when he first heard it, the faintest sound, like the shuffle of something alive where nothing should be. The noise came from the north fence, a stretch of land where tumbleweed often caught on wire and coyotes prowled when hunger made them bold. Bo narrowed his eyes, setting his mug down on the fence rail. He walked with the slow patience of a man who had seen too much to ever hurry again. The grass was wet with dew, the earth soft beneath his boots. He had lived long enough to know when something wasn't right, and this morning the land felt uneasy, as if holding its breath. 2 burlap sacks lay slumped against the fence posts. For a moment, he thought they were feed bags blown from a wagon. Then one shifted. A sudden, sharp twitch, followed by a muffled sound, high-pitched, like a whimper. Bo froze, the air pressing against his ribs. He crouched down, his calloused fingers brushing the rough burlap. The sacks were tied with fraying rope, crudely knotted. Something inside shifted again, lighter this time, as though trying to curl up smaller. His throat tightened. No animal moved like that dot with his knife. He cut the rope. The bag sagged open, and what spilled out was not grain or meat, but a boino older than 10 stirring up, with wide, steady eyes that had seen too much. The boy's lip was split, his face smeared with dirt and dried blood. His hands shot up. Defensively, as if to ward off a blow, Bo stepped back, startled. "Easy," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I ain't here to harm you." The boy said nothing, just stared like a cornered wolf. Bo turned to the second sack and cut it open. A girl, maybe 7, was curled tightly around a smaller bundle now. A toddler barely breathing, cheeks pale as milk. The girl clutched her brother, her face hidden under a snarl of unwashed hair. Bo's chest clenched. He hadn't felt anything twist him up this hard since his own little girl had died all those years ago, before the fever took his wife and left him with nothing but dust and empty rooms. The boy finally spoke, his voice flat and sharp. "She said someone kind might ride by." Bo frowned. "Who?" "Said that, our mama," the boy answered, without looking at him. Bo studied the 3 children for a long moment. No shoes on their feet, rags for clothes, faces hollow from hunger. There was no kindness left in the world for kids like these. And yet, someone had believed enough to leave them here, of all places. His ranched-up bow exhaled, rough and slow. "Come on," he muttered, jerking his head toward the house. "You can't sit out here like sacks of corn." The girl hesitated, eyes darting like a rabbit's, but the boy helped her to her feet. He carried the toddler too light for his size, followed Bo with wary steps. Inside the house, the children stood huddled near the door, as if afraid to touch anything. Bo set about warming milk on the stove, the silence thick enough to choke on. "You got names?" Bo asked, his back to them. The boy didn't answer at first, just watched Bo with a look that weighed and measured. Finally, he said, "Eli." He gestured to his sister. "That's May, and him. He's just little Sam." May's eyes, when they flicked up, were dark pools of mistrust. Sam stirred weakly, his small whimper cutting through the quiet like a knife. Bo set the milk down on the table and slid a cup toward them. "Drink," May hesitated until Eli took the cup and handed it to her. Bo didn't push. He wasn't one for many words. He simply watched as they drank in slow sips, hands trembling. Something in him cracked then, but he didn't show it. Later, as the sun climbed higher, Bo saddled his horse. He needed supplies, more food, blankets. The children needed warmth. But as he rode into town, he felt the eyes. They always watched him like he was something strange, something they couldn't name. A widower who lived too far out, spoke to little, and carried his ghost-like shadows. Mrs. Haverel, the preacher's wife, stood outside the mercantile, her lips pressed tight. "Back early, Bo?" she asked, her voice just sweet enough to bite. "Needed flour," he said, though his basket quickly filled with far more honey bread, dried apples, even a spool of soft yarn that reminded him of his daughter's old dolls. Someone muttered behind him. Another one took in strays. Lost his cattle soon after. Bo ignored it. Gossip was as common as dust. But when he paid, he caught the way Mrs. Haverel's gaze lingered on the extra food. Her mouth pursed, and he knew before long they'd all be whispering about him. And these kids back at the ranch. He found Eli trying to hammer a loose board back into place on the porch with nothing but a rock. Bo watched for a moment. "That's not how it's done," he said, taking the rock and swapping it with his own hammer. "Here, like this." Eli's thin arms strained with the effort, but he didn't quit. Bo admired that. He showed him how to hold the hammer steady, and for a flicker of a second, the boy's guarded face softened as evening rolled in. May braided strands of yarn into the broom, a habit of nervous hands. Bo pretended not to notice, but he kept glancing her way, wondering who had taught her to do that, wondering why such small acts could break him open so quietly. When the toddler woke crying, Bo sat beside him, whispering an old cowboy song he hadn't sung in years. His voice cracked, but the child calmed. He stayed there long after Sam had fallen asleep, staring into the flicker of the lantern, memories bleeding in. That night, as the wind curled around the ranch house, Eli finally spoke again. "You don't have to keep us." Bo looked up from the chair where he sat sharpening his knife. "I know." "Why are you?" Eli asked, a challenge hidden in the question. Bo thought for a long moment. "Someone should have helped my girl," he said, voice low, but no one did. Eli said nothing more. Later, when the children were asleep, Bo stepped out into the yard. The stars burned cold above, the same stars his daughter had once pointed to, calling them God's lanterns. His chest tightened until he had to sit on the porch steps. The prairie didn't forgive or forget, but maybe it could. Give second chances to those stubborn enough to stay in the stillness. He remembered his daughter's laugh, his wife's soft voice, and the way he'd once believed in something kinder than this life. He stared toward the north fence, where the sacks had been left, and wondered about the woman who'd walked away from her own blood. Was she desperate, shamed, or simply broken? Somewhere out there, a mother's footsteps had trailed off into the dark, leaving her children with nothing but hope that someone like him would find them. He stood, looking back at the house where 3 small lives now slept under his roof. Something stirred in him, not quite peace, but the faint echo of purpose, and as he closed the door, a voice, soft, tremulous, spoke behind him. May, awake in the shadows, clutching her little brother, will she come back for us? Bo paused, his hand resting on the frame. He didn't have the heart to answer. Instead, he said quietly, "Sleep now. Tomorrow's another day. But as he stood there, watching them drift off, he felt it the unspoken truth. Someone would come. And when they did, this fragile quiet he'd built might not hold. The prairie wind pushed against the window panes, as if carrying an answer he wasn't ready to hear. The sun was low and bleeding red across the western sky when Bo Laramie saw the silhouette on the horizon. He had just finished rubbing linseed oil into the old saddle, the only task left. Undone after supper, and was standing by the porch rail, his fingers sticky and smelling of dust and leather. The children were inside, their shadows dancing against the drawn curtains as May told Sam a story in her soft, sing-song voice. Eli sat in the corner most evenings, whittling sticks into arrowheads, his silence both armor and wound, but Bo's eyes weren't on the house. They were fixed on the figure moving up the hill, alone, tired, each step slow and deliberate, as though each inch forward cost her something. Her coat hung off her like old canvas. One boot was torn, the other patched in places that barely held. Her hair was cropped too short, as if she'd taken a blade to it herself in the dark dot. Bo didn't move. He didn't call inside. He only watched. When she reached the clearing at the edge of his property, she stopped. Her shoulders sagged, and for a breath, Bo thought she might collapse. But then her chin lifted, and even from a distance, he saw it, those eyes. Haunted, yes, but unmistakably hers. Mart Beadle, the wind pressed against him, lifting the brim of his hat just enough for him to feel the gravity of that moment shift. He hadn't known what she looked like, but somehow he had. Something in the slope of her shoulders, the hunger that clung to her like an old bruise. He had seen that same desperation in Eli. May and little Sam. Behind her came two men, town men. One was Reverend Sykes, the other a deacon whose name Bo had never cared to remember. They walked with the confidence of men who believed they were owed explanations. Bo stepped down from the porch. His hands were loose at his sides, but there was steel in his spine. Marable's eyes met his. They did not plead. They did not explain. "I ain't here to take what I gave up," she said, her voice rasping with fatigue, dust, and guilt. "Just wanted to see." The deacon cut in. "Bo, this woman's been hiding in the Arroyo camps. Word is she abandoned 3 miners in your care. That true?" Bo didn't answer him. His gaze stayed locked with Marable's abandonments. "A strong word," he said eventually. "Leaving them with nothing would have been that. She left them with hope. That's something." Reverend Sykes scoffed. "Hope? Bo, you've taken in children without speaking to anyone about their welfare. This isn't about charities, about law." Eli stepped out onto the porch then. He didn't say anything, just stood there with the porch light haloing behind him, a silent witness to every word. May appeared next, her small hand clutching the doorframe. Sam, half asleep, toddled behind her, clutching the braid of yarn she never let go of. Marabelle saw them, and her breath broke. Not a sob, not a cry, just a small, sharp intake of air that cracked through years of stone. "They look fed," she whispered. "Clean, safe." Bo turned to the preacher and his shadow. "You want to drag her into town? Go on then. But you do it in front of those children. You explain why the one thing they needed most their mother was hauled away in. Chains for trying to save Em the only way she knew how." The men hesitated, judgment and scripture clutched in their fists, but unsure how to throw them in the face of what stood before them. Reverend Sykes cleared his throat. "There are procedures and decency," Bo said, voice level. Pick one. The preacher looked away. The deacon mumbled something about writing a letter to the county. Then both men left, their boots crunching over the gravel with none of the righteousness they came in with. Silence folded over the land. Bo turned back to Maribel. She hadn't moved. Not even a step. "They remember you," he said. She shook her head. "They shouldn't." "You left them with your name," Bo said. "That's more than most do." Her lip trembled, but she clamped her mouth shut. Years of shame had taught her not to ask for softness. Bo didn't offer any, just the truth. "They don't want an apology," he said. "They want you, that's it." Maribel looked up at the porch. Eli was still standing there, hands shoved in his pockets. He didn't wave, didn't smile, but he didn't go back inside either. May slowly stepped down from the porch and walked up to her mother with all the solemnity of a judge. She stared up at her, eyes narrowed, curious. Then, without a word, she reached into her apron and pulled out a handful of dried lavender, braided together with the same yarn she used on the broom. She held it out. Maribel took it, was shaking. Fingers. May didn't hug her, didn't say, "I love you," but she didn't turn away. Maribel sank to her knees, pressing the braid to her chest, her body curling inward like something unfolding for the first time in years. Bo didn't watch long. He stepped back onto the porch, scooped Sam up gently, and rocked him in the old chair as the stars began to blink into the darkening sky. He listened to Maribel's low voice, cracked and halting, whispering a lullaby she barely remembered. Eli stayed on the porch steps, watching, not with forgiveness, but with possibility. Later, when the fire was lit inside and Maribel sat on the floor mending one of May's dresses by lamplight, Bo stood at the doorway and watched her hands. They were worn but steady, capable, the hands of someone who had made hard choices and still chose to keep trying. "You planning to stay?" he asked, voice low. She looked up at him, eyes wary. "If you'll let me." Bo shrugged. "Ain't mine to decide." He nodded toward the children. She followed his gaze. "I'll sleep in the barn," she said. "You'll sleep inside," he replied. "Ain't no one getting tossed out again, not on my land." She nodded once, then bent back to her sewing. The next morning, Bo found her outside at sunrise, hanging clean laundry between two sycamores. Her hands moved slowly but with care. The children still slept. The world was still. He walked up beside her, not speaking. They stood there in silence as a breeze rolled in, lifting the clean linen like sails. "I never meant to hurt them," she said finally, "but I wasn't enough. Not then." Bo glanced toward the house. "You are now," she nodded, but her shoulders were still tight. "I don't expect this to be simple," she whispered. Bo reached down, picked up the small wooden horse Eli had carved, and handed it to her. "Nothing worth keeping ever is," he said, and then, just before the wind carried it off. Maribel smiled, not the smile of a woman forgiven, but the smile of someone who might begin to forgive herself. That evening, they sat on the porch, all of them, May in Maribel's lap, Sam chasing a moth across the porch steps. Eli leaned against Bo's leg, silent, whittling again. No declarations, no sweeping promises. But when Maribel began to hum an old tune and Bo found himself joining on the low harmony, something unspoken settled over the ranch like the first snow of winter quiet. Weightless and true. A man who'd buried love had made room for it again. A woman who'd believed herself worthless was learning to stay, and children who once trembled in sacks at the edge of a stranger's fence now watched the stars with full bellies and steady hearts. Some reckon salvation comes with a sermon or a savior, but out here where fences stretch farther than memory and the wind carries more secrets than names, sometimes salvation comes wrapped in burlap, broken and breathing, waiting to be opened, and all it takes is a man too tired to hope, who decides to anyway.